Okay? Now, what it's saying here, what the compiler is arguing about, is the fact that because I've included the parentheses here, that's a signal to the Scala compiler that says, I'm expecting to pass parameters here, but there are no parameters, and so therefore things aren't quite lining up inside of its head. So I'm going to cut this out here, and let's see what happens. Okay, it compiles. Now let's try to run it. There we go, ping, 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 ping. And this will run forever, obviously, because I never bail out of that while loop. Now, pinging every second is, in of itself, interesting and useful, blah, 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 but it turns out that there are other things that I might like to do every second. I might want to send out some sort of packet of data. I might want to make a remote call. There's a lot of things I want to do. So let's make this code a little bit more reusable, and let's say that what I actually do can be passed in as a parameter. In the Java case, if I were going to do this, I would create some interface. I might call it iCallbackable, or once per secondable, or something similar and equally hard to use. And in order to use this once per second, I would have to pass in an instance of that once per secondable. And typically, particularly if this is a case where I'm only going to be doing whatever this thing is once, I would pass in an anonymous interclass instance of the once per secondable interface, and I'm going to be writing a whole bunch of code, and it's going to be very sharply indented all over the place, blah, blah, blah. To do the same in Scala is a little bit simpler. First of all, and I'll show you the completed version here, first of all, we're going to define the once per second to take a parameter, and we'll just call it, like I did in the example, we'll just call it callback. So once per second is going to take, or let's call it act. And act is going to take a function type. And the function type, well, let's see. The function that I'm going to invoke, instead of calling ping here, I'm just going to call act, like so. So act takes no parameters and yields nothing. Unit. Make sense? So now let me create a function here. We'll call it def ping. Like so. And if I come down here to once per second, I can pass in ping. Okay? And let's compile all this up. Type mismatch. Parens, parens, yielding unit, once per second, ping. The type inferencer, to be very blunt, is getting confused. It's not quite sure, looking at this, should I invoke ping and take its result, or should I pass ping directly? So this is a case, again, where the type inferencer has to be helped a little bit. We'll say that ping takes nothing. Okay, now it's happy. Scala hello world. And there we go. So now we have implicitly created a method that is infinitely more useful than it was when we started. Because now we can do anything inside of that method, inside of that once per second. As a matter of fact, we could make it even more interesting by saying let's also take how many seconds, like so. And again, if we compile it up, colon expected, but comma found. Again, this is the message from the compiler. One of the things about the Scala compiler is that the error messages are not always super clear. Okay? This is, again, the type inferencer going, I don't quite know what seconds is supposed to be, so we'll say it's an int. And there we go. Okay? Any questions so far? I have stunned them into silence, Neil. We're 2 for 2. You get a third shot next, and then, we'll see if we're done. All right. Now, if you think about that ping method for just a second, that ping method is really Worthless, to be very blunt about it. I mean, you know, where else do I actually call the method ping? It's kind of a waste of a top-level definition here. It's really annoying, right? And so it would be nice if I could just define the method that I want to invoke in line at the point of usage. Kind of like we used to do with the event handlers in Swing, you know, back when we cared about Swing. So to do the same thing in Scala, the syntax is going to look a little bit similar. Again, the parens here indicates that I'm essentially providing a placeholder for parameters. But now I'm actually going to provide this definition right here, like so. I'm running out of time. Yeah, well. I know the guy who's following me, and they don't want to listen to him. So effectively what I've done is I've created an inline function definition. Now, you remember the whole debate over Java closures, right? You know, and whether or not we should add them to the language and all that stuff. This is implicitly a closure. It's an anonymous function definition. To be specific, the notion of a closure is an anonymous function definition that can reference local variables without having to do anything special to those local variables, like we used to have to do in Java with anonymous inner classes, and we had to mark the locals as final if we wanted to be able to use them. You had to explicitly create the closure semantics, as they call them. Here, the compiler will do all of that stuff for you. So if we wanted, you know, if we wanted once per second to pass in a parameter to the function that we provide, we can do that as well. I mean, you can get really, really kind of, you know, edge casey with some of this stuff if you're not careful. And there we see basically the inline anonymous syntax. Now, there's obviously a lot more to Scala than what I've shown you. I mean, we can get into some class definitions here, right? And there's some really interesting elements here because that first line, that is actually the constructor itself. And we can start getting into, if I want to create POJOs in Scala, I can do so explicitly, like so. Or I can use a property to implicitly create the getters and setters, and so on and so forth. We get into comprehensions, for loops, et cetera, et cetera. There's a tremendous amount of stuff that you can learn in terms of following the Scala language. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to go over all of that here. I mean, we knew that going into this, right? Because I said as much. Go like this. Okay? But what I've done, hopefully, is given you at least enough of a grounding in the Scala language that you can go off and pick up the Bill Venner's book, Programming Scala, or you can pick up the Venkat Subramaniam book. I think it's Programming in Scala. One of them is Programming in, and the other one's Programming Scala. Just look for Scala books. You'll see them very quickly. All right. There's an article series that I've been doing for IBM Developer Works on Scala. There's a couple other places, resources out there, blogs and so forth that are talking about this. And this is not touching, by any stretch of the imagination, the very functional aspects of Scala in terms of thinking about how you want to structure your code, passing functions around back and forth, rather than explicitly iterating through a collection and so on and so forth. There's a lot. This is the tip of a very large iceberg, okay? But you've now seen it. You can recognize it. You can go off and do some of your own investigation. And sort of the culminating point to Scala is when you start exploring the actors framework for dealing with concurrency and message passing. That's sort of the end result, okay? Neil, are you ready to go? Come on up. I'll take questions while you're getting set up. Sir?
Just one question.
Just one question. From you, maybe.
Java language, F# language, and all other languages that are on the market today are having quite huge support from development environments.
Mm-hmm.
What's the case with Scala?
So does Scala have any support in terms of IDEs, toolings, and so forth? Certain of the IDEs are providing support for Scala. IntelliJ, for example, has some optional Scala support in IntelliJ 8. But It's not flawless yet. I mean, it's still being developed as we speak, and there's some rough edges to it, but for the most part, the IDEs are getting Scala support. A year ago, the answer would have been none at all. It's getting there. It's very definitely getting there. It's much better than it was. Any other questions?